The story of humanity is the story of survival. Long before the rise of cities, kingdoms, and modern technology, our ancestors faced an Earth that was far colder, far harsher, and far less forgiving than the world we know today. This was the Ice Age, a time when glaciers covered vast regions of the planet, when mammoths roamed the plains, and when every day was a test of endurance, adaptability, and resilience. To imagine how humans survived the Ice Age, we must first picture the world as it was tens of thousands of years ago. Much of the northern hemisphere was buried beneath colossal sheets of ice, thousands of feet thick. These glaciers stretched across North America, Europe, and Asia, grinding mountains down and carving valleys as they moved. Winters were long and severe, summers brief and cool. Forests were sparse in many regions, giving way to tundra and open steppe. Herds of giant animals grazed these landscapes: mammoths, mastodons, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, and wild horses. Predators such as cave lions, saber-toothed cats, and dire wolves stalked them. It was a world of extremes: bitter cold, scarce resources, and constant danger. And yet, against all odds, humans survived. More than that, they thrived, spreading across continents, building cultures, and developing tools and strategies that would carry them through one of the harshest chapters in Earth's history. Survival in the Ice Age depended on many things: fire, shelter, clothing, hunting, cooperation, and ingenuity. But above all, it depended on the ability of humans to adapt not just to the environment, but to the changes within it. Fire was one of the first and most important tools of survival. To our ancestors, fire was life itself. It provided warmth in the cold, light in the darkness, and protection against predators. It made food safer to eat and easier to digest. It hardened wooden tools, extended the day into the night, and became the center around which communities gathered. In the Ice Age, fire was not simply a convenience, it was the dividing line between life and death. Early humans learned how to maintain it, how to carry embers from one place to another, and eventually, how to create it when needed. Around a fire, the Ice Age wilderness became a little less hostile, and the bonds of human groups grew stronger. Clothing was another key to survival. The cold of the Ice Age was relentless, and without protection, no human could endure it for long. Early humans became skilled at using the hides and furs of animals they hunted. These furs were sewn together with bone needles and sinew thread, forming garments that insulated the body against freezing winds. Boots, cloaks, hoods, and gloves were fashioned to keep extremities warm. Over time, clothing grew more sophisticated, layered for efficiency, tailored for movement, and decorated as expressions of identity. What began as necessity slowly became culture. Shelter provided another defense. Humans sought caves, which offered natural protection, but caves were not always available. So they built. Using bones of mammoths, hides, wood, and stone, they constructed huts that withstood the cold and the snow. In some places, entire villages of bone and hide dwellings have been discovered, showing the ingenuity of humans who had little to work with but managed to create homes of surprising durability. These shelters, clustered together, became more than places to sleep. They became spaces where stories were told, tools were crafted, and communities grew close. But survival in the Ice Age required more than warmth and shelter. It required food. Humans were hunters, foragers, and opportunists. They tracked herds across the tundra, learning their movements, developing strategies to bring down animals far larger than themselves. Spears tipped with stone points, atlatls that extended the power of the throw, traps and coordinated hunts made it possible to kill creatures like mammoths and bison. Every part of the animal was used: meat for food, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, sinew for thread, fat for fuel. Nothing was wasted. Foraging was just as important. Humans gathered roots, berries, nuts, and plants when available. In frozen landscapes, edible plants were rare, but in certain seasons and regions, they were vital supplements to the diet. Humans also fished using bone hooks and nets. They learned to smoke, dry, and preserve food to carry them through lean times. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Ice Age survival was cooperation. Humans could not have survived alone. Small groups banded together: families, clans, tribes. They shared resources, knowledge, and protection. They taught one another how to hunt, how to prepare hides, how to shape stone into tools. Around fires, they shared myths and stories that gave meaning to their struggle. They painted caves with animals, symbols, and handprints, leaving behind echoes of their lives and beliefs. These images were not only art, but also memory reminders of the world they inhabited, the animals they depended on, and the mysteries they faced. But the Ice Age was not static. It was a time of great change. Glaciers advanced and retreated. Climate shifted. Animals went extinct. Humans migrated, following the herds, exploring new lands, crossing rivers, mountains, and even oceans. It was during this time that humans first entered the Americas, crossing the Bering Land Bridge from Asia. It was during this time that cultures spread across Europe and Asia, leaving traces in caves from France to Siberia. Survival meant not just enduring where one was, but moving, adapting, and learning to live in new environments. The resilience of humans during the Ice Age is a reminder of the extraordinary capacity of our species. With only simple tools and the strength of community, they faced environments that would test even modern people. They endured bitter winters, long hunts, scarcity, and danger. They built cultures rich in art and spirit. And when the Ice Age finally ended, around 12,000 years ago, they emerged not just as survivors, but as the ancestors of all who live today. To imagine them is to picture figures wrapped in furs, gathered around glowing fires beneath endless stars, their breath rising like smoke into the night air. It is to picture hunters tracking mammoths across snowy plains, or children playing in the warmth of a hut while winds howled outside. It is to picture hands pressing red ochre against cave walls, leaving marks that speak across millennia. The story of how humans survived the Ice Age is not only about endurance. It is about creativity, cooperation, and the unyielding drive to live. It is about how fragile creatures with no great strength, claws, or fangs managed to outlast an age of giants. It is the story of us. When we think of survival in the Ice Age, we might picture vast herds of animals, endless snow, and the fierce cold winds of an unforgiving land. But beneath this great and overwhelming picture lies the quiet ingenuity of human hands. It was not brute strength that allowed humans to endure. It was the tools they crafted, the skills they refined, and the wisdom they shared. Stone was the foundation of survival. For hundreds of thousands of years before the Ice Age reached its peak, humans had been shaping stone into sharp, durable forms. By the height of the last glacial period, their craftsmanship had grown precise and efficient. Flint, obsidian, and chert were chipped and flaked into blades, scrapers, and spear points. The sharp edges cut through hide and bone, carved wood, and butchered game. But the brilliance of these tools was not only in their sharpness, it was in the creativity behind them. Humans learned to attach stone blades to wooden shafts with sinew and resin, creating spears that could pierce the thick hide of a mammoth or the ribs of a bison. Later they invented the atlatl, a spear thrower, a lever of wood or bone that extended the human arm and multiplied its power. With it, a hunter could cast a spear farther and with greater force than ever before. Bone and antler, too, became vital materials. From them, humans carved needles, awls, and hooks. A bone needle might seem a small thing, but in the Ice Age, it was a miracle of survival. With it, clothing could be sewn tight, fitted, and layered against the cold. Without such clothing, long journeys across frozen plains would have been impossible. With it, humans were free to move, to hunt, and to explore even in the depths of winter. Fishing hooks of bone allowed humans to take food from rivers and lakes. Harpoons tipped with barbed bone points brought seals and fish from icy waters. Antler was shaped into handles, ornaments, and symbolic objects, showing that even in times of struggle, humans sought beauty and meaning in what they made. The bow and arrow would come later, after the Ice Age ended, but its foundations were already present in the ingenuity of those who lived before. The creativity of survival was always building, always reaching toward the next innovation. Fire, too, had its tools. Humans learned to strike flint against pyrite or iron-bearing stones, sending sparks into dry tinder. They learned to carry embers in bundles of bark or fungus, smoldering gently for hours, ready to ignite a new fire when the group stopped to rest. Fire was not just found in the wilderness. It was made, carried, nurtured, and passed on. Beyond tools for hunting and warmth, there were tools for memory. Cave walls became canvases. Red ochre, charcoal, and mineral pigments were ground and mixed, then applied with brushes of hair or simply with fingertips. Animals emerged on stone: mammoths, bison, horses, lions. Sometimes the paintings were accompanied by handprints, pressed into the rock like signatures across time. These were not mere decorations. They were tools of thought, of remembrance, of teaching. They carried knowledge, stories, and a sense of belonging. The Ice Age was not only survived through technology, it was survived through imagination. Humans did not only ask, "How can I live through this day?" They asked, "What does this life mean?" They made tools not only for the body, but for the spirit. The Ice Age world was not one uniform blanket of snow and ice. It was a mosaic of environments, each demanding its own strategies for survival. To the north lay the massive ice sheets, vast and crushing, extending like frozen seas over land. Nothing grew there, nothing moved there, except the slow grinding of ice itself. But at the edges, where glaciers met open ground, life was possible. Cold-adapted plants clung to the soil. Herds grazed the tundra. Humans followed them, hunting and gathering along the margins of the great ice. In more temperate zones, forests spread, though in smaller patches than today. Here, humans gathered nuts and berries in the summer, stored food for the winter, and hunted deer, boar, and elk. Rivers and lakes offered fish, waterfowl, and reeds for weaving baskets and mats. In open steppes, the great grasslands that stretched from Europe across Asia into Siberia, life teemed in astonishing abundance. These plains, though cold, supported vast herds of grazing animals. For hunters, the steppes were both a challenge and a gift. To bring down such prey required coordination, courage, and skill. But with success, the rewards were immense: enough meat, fat, and hide to sustain a group for weeks. In deserts and dry lands, survival demanded other strategies. Water was scarce, vegetation thin. Here humans learned to move constantly, to carry what they needed, to endure hardship with patience and resourcefulness. Each environment shaped the people who lived in it. Their tools, shelters, clothing, and diets reflected the demands of the land. To survive the Ice Age was not to conquer the environment, but to learn its rhythms, to move with its changes, to listen to what it allowed. The Ice Age is remembered as an age of giants. And indeed, many of the creatures that roamed the earth then were far larger than those we know today. The woolly mammoth, with its curved tusks and shaggy coat, grazed the grasslands in great herds. To hunt one was dangerous, but its meat could feed a community, its hide cover shelters, and its bones provide tools and structure. The woolly rhinoceros, armored in thick fur and heavy horn, wandered the frozen plains. Bison thundered across the steppes, while reindeer and wild horses moved in seasonal migrations. Predators stalked these herds: cave lions, larger than their modern relatives, dire wolves, heavy and strong, and saber-toothed cats, their long fangs symbols of the age. For humans, these animals were both threat and necessity. They provided food, but they also competed for it. To survive meant learning not only how to hunt, but how to avoid being hunted. Birds migrated with the seasons. Fish filled the rivers. Smaller creatures, hares, foxes, and rodents provided food, fur, and lessons in tracking. Even insects played their part, pollinating the sparse plants that clung to life in cold soil. In this web of life, humans were but one thread. Yet they learned to weave the threads together, to know the movements of animals, to read their signs, to anticipate their migrations. This knowledge, passed from generation to generation, was as important as any spear or shelter. The animals of the Ice Age were not only sources of survival, they were companions in story. To paint them on cave walls was to honor them, to remember them, to place them in a world of meaning. For humans did not see themselves as separate from these animals. They saw themselves as part of a greater balance, one life among many, sharing the earth beneath the cold sky. The Ice Age was not a still world. It was a world of movement. Glaciers advanced and retreated. Seasons stretched long and harsh, then softened only to freeze again. Rivers carved new paths, and coastlines shifted as ice locked up water and then released it. For humans, this constant change meant that survival was not about staying in one place. It was about learning when to move and where to go. Humans were wanderers. Long before the Ice Age reached its height, our ancestors had begun spreading out of Africa, moving across the continents in search of food, water, and shelter. By the time the last glacial maximum arrived, humans had already reached Europe, Asia, and Australia. Later, they would cross into the Americas, following herds and rivers across a land bridge exposed by lower seas. Migration was not a matter of aimless wandering. It was careful, patterned, and deeply tied to the land. Groups moved with the seasons, following the rhythms of animals and plants. In summer, they might travel north where herds grazed on tundra grasses. In winter, they would return south to forests and valleys that offered shelter from the bitter cold. Rivers were lifelines. They guided paths across landscapes, offered fresh water, and provided fish. Many Ice Age humans built their seasonal camps along rivers, returning year after year to the same bends and crossings. The land became a map of memory, with certain stones, trees, and hills serving as markers for direction. The movement was not only physical, it was cultural. When groups met, whether by chance or by design, they exchanged tools, materials, and ideas. Shells from the sea traveled hundreds of miles inland. Obsidian, sharp and precious, passed from hand to hand across regions. Knowledge how to make fire more quickly, how to hunt more effectively, how to stitch clothing more tightly spread like invisible threads connecting distant peoples. These connections meant that survival was not the achievement of one small group alone. It was the achievement of many groups, sharing, adapting, and learning together. Migration made humans not only resilient but also inventive. Each new land offered a challenge, and each challenge called forth creativity. To move was to risk, yet to remain still was to perish. And so humans became travelers across frozen plains, voyagers along rivers, seekers of valleys and forests. Migration was not just survival, it was identity. To be human in the Ice Age was to move. The Ice Age was an age of shelter. Without protection, the cold could strip life away in hours. But with ingenuity, humans built places of safety and warmth. In forests, they used wood. Branches and logs became frameworks, covered with hides or leaves to block the wind. In open plains, they turned to the animals they hunted. The bones of mammoths, enormous and strong, could be stacked into circles, with hides stretched over them to create domed shelters. Entrances were low, conserving heat, and hearths burned at the center, filling the interior with warmth and light. In caves, humans found natural refuge. Many groups settled in caves during the harshest months, gathering around fires that flickered against the stone. The walls of these caves became more than shelter. They became memory, covered with paintings and carvings that turned cold stone into a place of meaning. Snow itself could be shaped into survival. Packed tightly, it became blocks that insulated against the wind better than open air. Some groups used snow shelters for temporary protection, mastering the very substance that threatened them. Every shelter was more than practical. It was a center of life. Here, fire burned. Here, food was cooked and shared. Here, stories were told, songs sung, tools made, wounds tended. The shelter was a boundary between the wild cold outside and the fragile warmth of human community inside. To build shelter was to say, we belong here. We will endure. And each shelter, whether of bone, stone, or snow, was a testament to the creativity that allowed humans to survive. If tools and fire made survival possible, it was community that made it lasting. The Ice Age was not endured alone. It was endured together. Groups were small, often no more than 20 to 50 people, but within them flowed a deep current of cooperation. Each person had a role. Hunters tracked and pursued animals. Gatherers sought roots, berries, and herbs. Elders carried memory, knowledge of paths, plants, and seasons. Children learned by watching, imitating, and listening. Food was shared. A successful hunt was not the prize of one individual, but the sustenance of the group. This sharing built trust, and trust built resilience. When one was weak, others gave. When one was injured, others carried. In this way, the group endured storms, scarcity, and loss. Communication grew richer in these bonds. Language blossomed not only sounds for warning or calling, but words for teaching, remembering, and imagining. Around the fire, humans spoke of hunts and journeys, of ancestors and spirits, of hopes and fears. These stories were more than entertainment. They were threads of connection, weaving the group into something greater than individuals alone. Rituals emerged. Burial sites from the Ice Age show that humans treated their dead with care, placing tools, ornaments, and offerings beside them. This respect suggests that life was seen as more than physical survival. It was seen as part of a greater pattern, a mystery that bound the living and the dead. Community was the true shelter. Stronger than mammoth bones, warmer than fire, it was the invisible force that held people together in the face of an unforgiving world. To survive the Ice Age was to belong. The Ice Age was not only about survival of the body, it was also about survival of the mind. And in the cold silence of caves, humans began to leave behind something that would outlast the storms and the glaciers. They painted, Deep within limestone caverns where flickering firelight cast shadows on the walls, hands pressed pigment to stone. Images of bison, mammoth, horse, and deer emerged, their lines simple yet powerful. Some were painted in earthy red ochre, others in black charcoal. Some showed herds in motion, others single animals, large and still, as though gazed upon with reverence. But these paintings were not just art. They were symbols. They carried meaning beyond the hunt itself. Some may have been prayers calling for success, for safety, for abundance. Others may have been stories, memories of hunts, lessons for the young. And some may have been the first sparks of imagination made visible. Symbols also took shape in carvings and ornaments. Small figures carved from ivory or stone, beads made from shells and bones, pendants shaped like animals or abstract forms. These objects were not tools. They were something more. They were signs of thought that reached beyond the present moment, into memory, into meaning. The use of symbols strengthened survival. For a group that could communicate ideas, plans, and beliefs had an advantage over one that could not. Symbols allowed humans to carry knowledge across time, passing it from generation to generation. A child could learn not only from what they saw, but from the stories, the songs, and the paintings left behind. In the Ice Age, symbols were warmth for the mind, just as fire was warmth for the body. They gave shape to hope. They turned survival into story. And they began the long human journey into imagination. The Ice Age was not fixed. It moved, shifted, rose, and fell. Glaciers advanced, pressing southward, covering vast lands with crushing ice. Then, slowly, they retreated, releasing water, swelling rivers, flooding valleys. For humans, this meant constant adjustment. Camps that once stood in fertile valleys might, within a generation, lie buried under sheets of ice. Paths that once guided herds might vanish into frozen seas. Rivers might swell into impassable floods as the world warmed, only to shrink again as the cold returned. Adaptation became the rhythm of life. Humans learned to read signs in the landscape, the tilt of the sun, the behavior of animals, the growth of plants. They noticed when herds began to move earlier in the season, when rivers carried more water, when the wind shifted from warm to cold. These observations were not just casual. They were survival, and yet humans did more than react. They anticipated. They planned. They stored food, not only for days but for months. They prepared shelters that could withstand storms. They carried tools with them, ready for sudden movement. They taught their children not only how to live, but how to expect change. This ability to adapt to a world in motion was one of humanity's greatest strengths. Other animals relied on instinct alone. Humans relied on foresight. They could imagine what was coming and act before it arrived. In a world where glaciers rose like walls of stone and climates swung between extremes, foresight was the difference between survival and extinction. The world changed again and again. And each time, humanity changed with it. Amid the harshness, there was also a deeper resilience, a spirit that went beyond tools and shelters. Humans of the Ice Age found meaning in their struggle. They looked at the stars. Night after night, the same constellations wheeled above the frozen plains. Patterns of light gave direction but also stirred wonder. In those stars, people may have seen stories of ancestors, hunters, and animals myths to explain the mystery of existence. They honored the animals they hunted. Some burial sites show human and animal remains placed together, suggesting a bond of respect. For the hunters of the Ice Age, animals were not only prey, they were partners in survival, spirits with power, teachers of endurance. They created rituals. Fire was not only warmth, but symbol. Gathering around it, people shared not only food, but meaning. The flames became a center of life, a place where the visible and the invisible seemed to meet. This spirit of survival was as vital as any tool. It kept despair from overwhelming. It gave reason to endure when the nights were long and the cold was endless. It gave humans a sense that their lives were part of something larger, a pattern, a story, perhaps even a design. And so survival was never only physical. It was emotional. It was spiritual. It was carried in symbols, in rituals, in stories, in the quiet strength of community. The Ice Age did not last forever. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the great glaciers began to melt. The process took thousands of years, but signs were clear for those who lived through it. Winters became a little shorter, summers a little longer. The ice sheets that had pressed down on the land began to retreat, releasing water back into rivers and seas. Valleys once locked beneath ice opened into green plains. For humans, this was both gift and challenge. The melting ice filled rivers and lakes, providing new sources of fish. Forests spread northward, offering wood for tools, shelters, and fire. Animals that once roamed the southern plains moved into these new lands, and hunters followed. But warming also brought instability. As glaciers melted, seas rose, swallowing coastlines. Places where people had lived for generations vanished beneath waves. Rivers overflowed their banks. Weather patterns shifted, sometimes bringing heavy rains, sometimes bringing long droughts. Still, humans adapted. They built new camps along fresh water. They learned to fish not only with spears, but with hooks and lines. They fashioned canoes and rafts to cross swelling rivers. They began to gather more plants, fruits, and nuts, taking advantage of the richer landscapes. This transition was not easy. Whole communities may have been forced to move as the sea claimed their homes. But the same resilience that had carried humanity through the depths of the Ice Age carried them through its end. The Earth was changing, and humanity changed with it. The retreat of the ice was not only the end of one age, it was the beginning of another. As the climate warmed, something remarkable began to happen. For tens of thousands of years, humans had survived as hunters and gatherers, moving with the seasons, following herds, collecting plants where they grew wild. But now, in certain places, people began to experiment. They noticed that seeds, when dropped, could sprout again. They saw that plants tended near camp grew better than those left alone. Slowly, cautiously, they began to shape the land. The first signs of agriculture were simple. People scattered seeds of wild grains. They tended patches of edible plants. They began to store more food than before, not just in hides and pits, but in containers shaped from clay. These were small steps, but they were steps away from a life of constant movement. The Ice Age shaped humanity in ways that still echo today. It taught endurance, patience, and adaptability. To survive, humans had to cooperate. A single person could not face a mammoth or a long winter alone. Communities became strong because every hand mattered, every hunter, every gatherer, every firekeeper. Bonds of trust were not optional. They were life itself. It also taught humans to think beyond the moment. A frozen landscape offered no second chances. Food had to be saved, tools had to be repaired, shelter had to be strong. Those who planned endured. Those who did not faded into the ice. And above all, the Ice Age taught imagination. Looking at a stone, humans saw not just a rock, but a tool. Looking at a bone, they saw a needle, a spear, a weapon. Looking at the stars above, they wondered about patterns, about time, about meaning. Imagination became survival's greatest ally. Without the long challenge of ice, perhaps humanity would never have learned to dream so boldly. The cold sharpened not only stone blades, but also the human mind. When the Ice Age ended, humans emerged changed forever. They had crossed frozen plains, followed herds into the unknown, faced hunger and storms and nights longer than fear itself. And yet, they survived. The world they entered was warmer, richer, and more open than before. Rivers sang with new life. Forests reached for the sky. Grain sprouted, animals gathered, and humans began to settle into villages, then towns, then civilizations. But deep within, the memory of the ice remained. The resilience forged in those frozen centuries stayed with us. It is why humans can live in deserts and jungles, on islands and mountains. It is why we build, adapt, and endure. Even now, the echoes of the Ice Age linger in us, in our stories of struggle, in our drive to prepare for the future, in our awe of nature's power. So tonight, as you rest, remember this. You are the descendant of survivors. Every breath you take carries the legacy of those who faced the cold and refused to surrender. Every beat of your heart is proof of their endurance. The Ice Age was not only an age of hardship, it was an age of transformation. It shaped humanity into what it is today. Fragile, yes, but also strong. Dependent, yes, but also creative. Vulnerable, yes, but endlessly resilient. The story of survival is the story of us all. And so as sleep comes, let this truth comfort you. If humans could survive the Ice Age with little more than fire, courage, and each other, then within you too lives that same strength, that same resilience, that same spark of survival. Close your eyes, breathe softly, rest, you are safe. You are part of a story billions of years in the making, and the Earth, which once wrapped its children in ice, now wraps you in the warmth of its memory. The Ice Age was not a single season, nor a single storm. It was an age that stretched across tens of thousands of years, shaping not only the land, but the destiny of humanity itself. Imagine vast sheets of ice, miles thick, pressing down on continents. Imagine a world where winters were not measured in months, but in centuries. Yet within this frozen era, life endured. Small bands of humans learned to carve out survival against the cold, and their story is the foundation of who we are today. They were not many, these humans of the Ice Age. Scattered across Africa, Asia, and Europe, they lived in groups no larger than extended families, moving constantly in search of food. Their tools were simple stone blades, chipped from flint, wooden spears hardened in fire, but in their simplicity, they carried genius. With these, our ancestors faced creatures far larger and far stronger than themselves. The mammoth, the bison, the cave bear. Every hunt was a gamble, every day a struggle, and yet against the odds, they survived. Domestication followed. Dogs, once wild companions of the hunt, became loyal partners. Goats and sheep, once hunted, were tamed. Humans learned to guide their breeding, to keep them close, to rely on them for milk, wool, and meat. The Ice Age had taught humanity the value of foresight, of planning ahead for harsh winters. Now that same foresight turned toward farming, toward raising animals, toward creating a steadier life. Yet even as agriculture began, many still lived as hunters and gatherers. The world was in transition, a time when people could look back at the old way of life and forward toward the new. The end of the Ice Age was not just a change in climate, it was the opening of possibility. With the ice gone, with rivers flowing and forests rising, with food sources multiplying, humans had room to grow. They had the freedom to imagine. What began as survival in the shadow of glaciers was now becoming the story of civilization. The Ice Age shaped humanity in ways that still echo today. It taught endurance, patience, and adaptability. To survive, humans had to cooperate. A single person could not face a mammoth or a long winter alone. Communities became strong because every hand mattered, every hunter, every gatherer, every firekeeper. Bonds of trust were not optional. They were life itself. It also taught humans to think beyond the moment. A frozen landscape offered no second chances. Food had to be saved, tools had to be repaired, shelter had to be strong. Those who planned endured. Those who did not faded into the ice. And above all, the Ice Age taught imagination. Looking at a stone, humans saw not just a rock but a tool. Looking at a bone, they saw a needle, a spear, a weapon. Looking at the stars above, they wondered about patterns, about time, about meaning. Imagination became survival's greatest ally. Without the long challenge of ice, perhaps humanity would never have learned to dream so boldly. The cold sharpened not only stone blades but also the human mind. When the Ice Age ended, humans emerged, changed forever. They had crossed frozen plains, followed herds into the unknown, faced hunger and storms, and nights longer than fear itself. And yet they survived. The world they entered was warmer, richer, and more open than before. Rivers sang with new life. Forests reached for the sky. Grain sprouted, animals gathered, and humans began to settle into villages, then towns, then civilizations. But deep within, the memory of the ice remained. The resilience forged in those frozen centuries stayed with us. It is why humans can live in deserts and jungles, on islands and mountains. It is why we build, adapt, and endure. Even now, the echoes of the Ice Age linger in us, in our stories of struggle, in our drive to prepare for the future, in our awe of nature's power. So tonight, as you rest, remember this. You are the descendant of survivors. Every breath you take carries the legacy of those who faced the cold and refused to surrender. Every beat of your heart is proof of their endurance. The Ice Age was not only an age of hardship, it was an age of transformation. It shaped humanity into what it is today. Fragile, yes, but also strong. Dependent, yes, but also creative. Vulnerable, yes, but endlessly resilient. The story of survival is the story of us all, and so as sleep comes, let this truth comfort you. If humans could survive the Ice Age with little more than fire, courage, and each other, then within you too lives that same strength, that same resilience, that same spark of survival. Close your eyes, Breathe softly, rest, you are safe. You are part of a story billions of years in the making. And the earth, which once wrapped its children in ice, now wraps you in the warmth of its memory. Sleep well. The land they walked was not familiar to us. Rivers froze solid in winter, and when they thawed, they roared with meltwater powerful enough to carve valleys. Forests of pine and spruce stretched endlessly, their needles whispering in the wind. The grassland's cold steppe plains were filled with herds, great migrations of animals that kept humanity alive. And always, in the distance, loomed the ice itself. Vast walls of white, silent and immovable, marking the edge of a world locked in deep freeze. For early humans, the cold was the greatest enemy. Fire became more than warmth. It was survival itself. They learned to keep embers alive, carrying them from camp to camp, never letting the flame die. At night, fire pushed back the darkness and kept predators at bay. Around it, they gathered, telling stories, passing knowledge, singing songs that carried memory from one generation to the next. But fire was not enough. To face the Ice Age, humans turned to clothing. From the hides of deer and reindeer, they stitched garments using bone needles. They learned to layer furs, to bind their feet with leather wrappings stuffed with grasses for insulation. These were not crude improvisations, they were careful innovations, born of necessity, crafted with skill. Over time, clothing became as vital as any weapon. Shelter, too, was transformed. Some groups lived in caves, their walls painted with visions of the animals they depended on. Others built huts from mammoth bones, covering them with hides, creating warm havens against the endless winds. Imagine stepping into such a hut. The smell of smoke, the glow of firelight against ivory tusks, the sound of wind outside muted by the thick skins stretched across the frame. These were not mere shelters. They were sanctuaries. And yet, even with fire, clothing, and shelter, survival was never guaranteed. The Ice Age was a test not only of the body, but of the mind. Humans had to think ahead, to plan for seasons, to store food for lean months. They dried meat, preserved fat, ground seeds into paste, stored them in skin bags. They followed the migration of animals, reading tracks in snow, knowing the patterns of herds. They understood the sky, the stars, the cycle of seasons. Slowly, these survival strategies became culture. The hunt was not only for food, it was ritual. Before a great mammoth hunt, some groups painted its image on cave walls, as if asking permission, as if calling the spirit of the animal into the open. Bones were arranged with care. Skulls were placed in circles. The Ice Age was not only about enduring the physical cold, it was about making meaning in a world that often seemed merciless. The dangers were many. A single mistake in the hunt could mean starvation. A fall into icy water could mean death within minutes. Disease spread easily in close groups. But there was also unity. Survival was not individual, it was collective. Families shared food, carried the weak, cared for the young and the old. This unity became a strength, greater than any claw or tooth. Cooperation allowed humans to endure what no solitary creature could. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, the bonds of family and community grew into the foundation of humanity itself. And yet, the Ice Age was not endless. Slowly the earth warmed, glaciers retreated, valleys filled with rivers, forests spread once more, new animals emerged, and humanity, ever adaptable, changed with it. The skills learned in the cold clothing, shelter, fire, cooperation became the seeds of civilization. The Ice Age shaped us. It taught us resilience. It carved into our memory the knowledge that survival is possible, even against the harshest odds. Tonight, as you listen, imagine walking in their footsteps. Picture the crunch of snow underfoot, the glow of firelight on faces, the endless sky filled with stars. Imagine the silence of ice stretching to the horizon and the determination of those who would not give in. The Ice Age was a crucible, and from it, humanity emerged tempered, stronger, wiser. And as you drift into rest, remember, within you, within all of us, lies the same endurance, the same strength, the same fire that kept our ancestors alive. For they survived not only the Ice Age, they survived for us. The Ice Age was not one moment in time, but a great rhythm of the earth, cycles of freezing and thawing, advancing glaciers and slow retreats. Imagine standing on the edge of such a world, a horizon where ice meets sky, where the air is so sharp it bites the lungs with every breath. The cold is constant, not a season to endure and wait out, but the very shape of the world itself. Yet here, among this frost and silence, human life persisted, and not only persisted, it adapted, endured, and found ways to flourish against odds that seem almost unimaginable to us today. Every step into the Ice Age world was a step into danger, and yet, with each danger came invention. Humans became builders, thinkers, and dreamers in ways no creature had before. The cold demanded not only warmth but foresight, not only shelter but the will to imagine beyond the present moment. Picture a group of hunters moving silently across the snow. Their breaths cloud in the freezing air, their furs bound tightly around them, stitched carefully with sinew to keep out the wind. They carry spears tipped with flint, each point sharpened by long hours of patient work. Ahead of them, a herd of reindeer moves slowly, heads down against the blowing snow. The hunters know the patterns of these animals. They know where they graze, where they cross rivers, where they rest. They do not rush. They wait, patient, moving in rhythm with the herd, knowing that a single misstep, a sound too loud, could cost them their only chance at food for weeks. This patience, this observation, was survival itself. The hunt was brutal, but it was also sacred. When an animal fell, it was not merely a kill, it was a gift. Every part was used, the meat for food, the hide for clothing and shelter, the bones for tools, the sinew for thread. Nothing was wasted, because nothing could be wasted. To waste was to court death. Around the fire that night, as the meat roasted slowly and the smell of smoke filled the air, the group would share stories of hunts long past, of spirits that moved through the land, of ancestors who had walked before them. These stories were not entertainment alone. They were maps of memory, ways of teaching, ways of binding the group together. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, stories were warmth as much as fire. But life was never secure. Imagine walking through a frozen forest, the silence broken suddenly by the roar of a cave lion, larger and stronger than any predator alive today. Its golden eyes flash in the dim light, its body lean with hunger. For early humans, encounters like this were tests of courage and cooperation. Alone, they were prey. Together, they could become more. Spears raised, voices shouted, fires brandished. They stood not as individuals, but as a wall of defiance. Sometimes they won, driving the predator back. Sometimes they lost, but always they learned. Each danger carved wisdom into the memory of the group, shaping instincts that echo in us even now, the quickening heartbeat in the dark, the sudden alertness at the snap of a twig. These are echoes of the Ice Age, alive within us still. The land itself shifted and changed beneath them. Vast rivers of ice ground mountains into valleys. Plains stretched wide, filled with grasses that fed herds of mammoth and bison. In some places, the cold was so deep that the ground itself remained frozen year-round, the permafrost locking the earth in silence. Yet even here, life found ways to bloom. Small plants, hardy and resilient, pushed through the snow. Mosses and lichens clung to rocks, feeding reindeer that in turn fed humans. In this chain of survival, each link mattered. Humans learned to see not only the animals, but the plants, the cycles, the great web that bound all together. They were hunters, but also observers of nature's design, learning its rhythms, its signs, its secrets. Shelter became an art of necessity. In caves, walls were painted with ochre and charcoal, images of mammoths, bison, horses, reindeer creatures that gave them life. Perhaps these were prayers, perhaps they were records, perhaps they were dreams, but they were also a way of holding on to meaning in a world that could seem merciless. In open plains where no caves existed, humans built shelters from mammoth bones, setting tusks like arches, binding them with hides, creating domes of warmth where firelight flickered. Inside, families huddled together, children pressed close to mothers, the old teaching the young. In that firelit glow, humanity's future was shaped, not in battles, not in conquest, but in the quiet endurance of ordinary nights. The Ice Age demanded not only strength, but imagination. To survive, they had to dream beyond the present hunger, the present cold, the present fear. They had to plan for tomorrows they might not live to see. Seeds of culture grew here: rituals, language, music. A flute carved from the bone of a bird carried notes into the frozen night, soft and haunting, perhaps to soothe, perhaps to connect, perhaps to remind them that life was more than survival. The first sparks of art, of music, of shared wonder, glowed in the very heart of the cold, and slowly, the Ice Age began to shift. The glaciers retreated, the climate warmed, forests spread again across lands once barren. But the humans who stepped into this new world were not the same as those who had entered it. They carried with them the fire of resilience, the knowledge of unity, the skills of adaptation. They had endured an age of ice and emerged not broken, but stronger. The Ice Age had not only tested humanity, it had defined it. As you listen now, imagine yourself among them. Imagine the long nights by the fire, the endless snow stretching out beyond, the courage to face a world that seemed determined to erase you. Imagine the strength in their hands, the patience in their minds, the fire in their hearts. For the Ice Age was not only their story, it is our story, written in the marrow of our bones, carried in the whispers of our instincts, alive in the endurance of our species. And so, as you drift into rest, let the thought carry you, that within you is the same resilience that carried them. Within you is the same fire that warmed them. Within you is the strength not only to survive, but to endure, to imagine, to create. The Ice Age has passed, but its lessons remain. Humanity survived, and so will you. The Ice Age was not a chapter that passed quickly. It lasted tens of thousands of years, and within those endless winters, countless generations lived, struggled, and dreamed. Imagine being born into a world where the first sound you hear is the wind howling against hides stretched over a shelter of bones, where your first breath is filled with the sharp sting of frozen air, and where survival is the only constant truth. For every child born, there was a question: would they grow strong enough to see adulthood? Would the herd return in time? Would the fire last through the night? These uncertainties were the rhythm of life, and yet humanity pressed forward step by step, day by day. Food was always at the center of survival. The great animals of the Ice Age, mammoths, bison, reindeer, woolly rhinoceroses, were more than prey. They were lifelines. When hunters tracked them across frozen plains, they carried with them the hopes of an entire group. A successful hunt meant feasting, strength, laughter. A failed hunt meant hunger, weakness, despair. But humans did not rely on the great beasts alone. They learned to gather what the land could offer: berries hardened by frost, roots dug from the frozen ground, seeds and nuts hidden beneath snow. They learned to fish rivers that flowed even in the coldest seasons, breaking ice to cast spears into the water. Nothing was overlooked. The world demanded resourcefulness, and in return, humans developed an eye for opportunity in even the bleakest of places. The act of sharing was as important as the act of hunting. In small groups, survival was never an individual effort. The meat of a mammoth was too much for one family to consume, and so it was shared, divided carefully, each cut of flesh ensuring that all could live. This sharing created bonds stronger than blood, ties of trust and loyalty. Around the fire, food became more than nourishment. It became a ritual of togetherness, a way of saying, we survive as one. Migration was constant. To stay in one place was to risk starvation. As the seasons shifted, as the herds moved, humans followed. Imagine a long line of figures trudging across snow, their breath rising in clouds, their burdens heavy with tools, hides and children wrapped tight against the cold. The land they crossed was vast mountains of ice, valleys carved by glaciers, rivers that surged with meltwater. Yet they moved with purpose, guided by memory and instinct. Each migration carried knowledge forward, where food could be found, where danger lurked, where shelter waited. Over time, these paths became the invisible map of humanity's survival. But with every migration came danger. Crossing a frozen river could mean life or death. The ice might hold, or it might shatter beneath their weight. Storms could sweep across plains, blinding eyes and numbing limbs, leaving the weak to falter. Predators followed too: wolves, lions, hyenas drawn to the same herds humans hunted. To walk through the Ice Age was to walk through a world always on the edge of peril. Yet within that peril, humans found courage. Each obstacle overcome added to the wisdom of the group, each survival a lesson carved into the memory of the species. Spirituality became a light in the darkness. The world was too harsh, too unpredictable to face without meaning. So humans looked beyond the visible. They saw spirits in the fire, guardians in the stars, ancestors in the wind. They carved figures from bone and ivorismal shapes of humans and animals, symbols of fertility, strength, protection. They painted walls deep within caves, images that flickered in torchlight, alive with movement. Perhaps these were prayers, asking the spirits for guidance. Perhaps they were records of hunts, memories preserved in art. Perhaps they were something more, expressions of the human soul, reaching for understanding in a cold and merciless world. Fire itself was sacred. It was warmth, light, and life drawn from wood, bone, and spark. To lose fire was to face death. To carry fire from one camp to the next was to carry survival in a fragile ember. Children learned from their earliest days to respect fire, to guard it, to feed it. Around its glow, people told stories that stretched time, stories of creation, of heroes, of the great animals. In this way, fire was not only physical but also cultural. It kept the body alive, and it kept the spirit whole. The Ice Age was not uniform. In some places, glaciers towered like mountains, grinding the land beneath. In others, grasslands spread wide, green in brief summers, golden in autumn, white in winter. Humanity adapted to each setting. In forests, they built traps for smaller game. On the plains, they coordinated hunts, driving herds toward cliffs or into enclosures. Near rivers, they learned to weave nets and sharpen fish hooks. This ability to adapt, to reshape survival strategies for each landscape, was the gift that allowed humanity to endure where others could not. Generation after generation passed. Children grew into hunters, hunters became elders, elders became stories remembered around the fire. Each generation carried knowledge forward, not written in books, but spoken, demonstrated, lived. This chain of memory was fragile. If a story was forgotten, if a skill was lost, it could mean disaster. Yet humans proved remarkable keepers of knowledge. They remembered where to find water, how to build shelters, when to move with the herds. They remembered, and because they remembered, they survived. And then slowly the world began to change again. The ice retreated. Forests spread. Animals shifted their ranges. The great mammoths grew fewer, the climate softened, and humanity found itself standing at the edge of something new. In this changing world, new possibilities emerged: settlement, farming, villages, civilizations. But all of it, the seeds of culture, the roots of society, grew from the soil of the Ice Age. Without the endurance of those who faced the cold, without their resilience, their imagination, their unity, the story of humanity would have ended long before civilization began. So when we ask, how did humans survive the Ice Age? The answer is not simple. They survived through strength, but also through cooperation. Through hunger, but also through sharing. Through fear, but also through belief. They survived not only by fighting the world, but by adapting to it, learning its rhythms, and finding meaning within its silence. The Ice Age lives on, not in glaciers or mammoths, but in us. In the instincts that stir when night falls, in the stories we tell around light, in the strength we find when life demands endurance. The Ice Age shaped humanity, and its lessons still whisper in the depths of our being. And so, as you hear these words, remember, you are the child of survivors. You carry their fire, their strength, their resilience. The Ice Age has ended, but its legacy burns within you, as steady as the flame that once warmed their shelters, as eternal as the stars that guided them through the frozen dark. In the long winters of the Ice Age, survival was not just about endurance, it was about innovation. Humans learned to shape the world with their hands, to turn stone, bone, and wood into tools that multiplied their strength. The first tools were simple flakes of stone chipped sharp enough to cut. With these, hides could be sliced, meat could be stripped from bone, wood could be shaped into spears. Over time, the tools became more refined. Blades were carefully knapped, their edges sharper, their shapes suited for specific tasks. Scrapers were made to prepare hides for clothing. Awls were carved from bone to pierce holes, allowing sinew to stitch furs together. The Ice Age demanded ingenuity, and humans answered with craftsmanship. Imagine a group gathered inside a shelter, the wind screaming outside, the cold pressing in. One sits near the fire, striking stone against stone, sending sparks and sharp flakes into the air. Another bends over a piece of bone, carving it with patience. Children watch, learning with wide eyes, their small hands eager to copy. In this way, knowledge passed silently, generation to generation, carried not in words but in actions. Clothing was as important as food. Without it, the body could not withstand the frozen nights. From the hides of animals, humans stitched garments, furs worn thick in winter, lighter skins used in the rare warmth of summer. Boots were lined with grass or moss to trap heat. Cloaks were fastened with bone pins. Every piece of clothing was more than comfort, it was survival. And when the clothes were made, They were decorated. Beads of bone or ivory, shells carried from distant coasts, ochre pigments rubbed into fabric. Even in hardship, humans sought beauty. Hunting was never guaranteed. A mammoth could provide for many weeks, but to bring one down required immense cooperation. Spears tipped with stone points were hurled with the aid of atlatls throwing sticks that extended the hunter's arm, giving the spear more speed and force. Sometimes hunters drove animals toward cliffs or into swamps where escape was impossible. Other times they relied on stealth, creeping close before striking. Each hunt was dangerous. A mammoth could crush with a single step. A bison could gore. A woolly rhinoceros could charge. Many hunters carried scars. Some never returned. Yet the risk was taken again and again, for without the hunt there was no life. And still, humanity did not live by meat alone. They learned the secrets of plants, even in the frozen world. Berries that could be eaten fresh or dried for later. Roots dug from beneath snow, boiled to soften. Nuts cracked open for their oil-rich kernels. In coastal places, seaweed gathered from the shore. In every environment, humans searched and discovered. Slowly, an encyclopedia of nature grew, not written on pages, but stored in memory, in story, in habit. Life was fragile. Illness came suddenly, wounds festered, hunger weakened. But in their small groups, humans cared for one another. The sick were tended, the injured were carried, the old were respected. Archaeologists have found skeletons of Ice Age people who lived for years with crippling injuries, a sign that others must have looked after them. This compassion, this care, was as essential to survival as fire or food. Death was never far, but even in death, there was meaning. Some bodies were buried with tools, beads, and ochre, as though prepared for a journey beyond. Graves show careful placement, attention, reverence. To bury the dead was to acknowledge that life had value, that existence was not only survival, but something deeper. The Ice Age sky was a map, and humans learned to read it. Stars marked the seasons, the movement of herds, the turning of time. The moon with its changing face became a guide for cycles of hunting and gathering. Around fires, elders lifted their hands to the sky, tracing constellations with words that carried memory and wonder. In the heavens, humans found not just direction, but also meaning. As time passed, humanity spread. Out of Africa, across Europe and Asia, into the frozen north, and eventually across a land bridge into the Americas. Each new land brought challenge, unknown animals, untested climates, unfamiliar dangers. Yet the same resilience, the same adaptability, carried humans forward. Step by step they expanded, until no corner of the earth was untouched by their presence, and in every place. They left their mark not only tools and bones, but art. The painted caves of Lascaux and Chauvet, the carved figurines, the etched symbols. These were not necessities for survival, yet they were created. Why? Perhaps as prayers for the hunt, perhaps as teaching for the young, perhaps as an attempt to speak with the unseen. Whatever the reason, they reveal something profound. Even in the harshest age, humans were not content with survival alone. They sought to create, to express, to understand. The Ice Age was not just a test of endurance. It was the forge in which humanity's character was shaped. Strength and weakness, fear and courage, despair and hope, all were woven into the lives of those who came before us. Every breath we take today carries their legacy. Every fire we light echoes the flames they tended. Every story we tell descends from the words they spoke under stars. So when you close your eyes and drift into sleep, imagine yourself there on the frozen plains, beneath a vast and star-filled sky. The fire glows beside you, the wind howls in the distance, and your people huddle close. The world is cold, yet you are not alone. The same strength that carried them carries you. The same resilience that saw them through the ice beats in your heart. And just as they endured, so do you, a living continuation of their story. In the long arc of human survival, the Ice Age was more than a struggle against the cold. It was a time of shaping identity, of forming the foundations of what it meant to be human. Every day demanded effort, but every effort created new skills, new bonds, new ways of understanding the world. Picture the caves, deep in the earth where flickering firelight danced against stone walls. Here, humans painted, their hands dipped in ochre and charcoal, pressing against rock, leaving imprints that still remain after tens of thousands of years. Animals roamed across these walls: bison, horses, mammoths painted with motion, with care, with reverence. These were not random images. They were messages, stories, prayers, perhaps even lessons. In the stillness of the caves, humans captured the essence of life, their vision preserved for those who would come long after them. The cave was not only shelter, it was a sanctuary, a place where survival met imagination. Outside, the world stretched vast and silent, but the human presence was always moving. Small bands traveled across tundras, followed herds across valleys, traced rivers to new lands. Every migration was a gamble. Would there be enough food? Would the weather hold? Would the predators be too many? Yet with each journey, new territories were claimed, new paths were etched into memory. Over time, these paths became the arteries of human movement, carrying life into every corner of the world. The animals of the Ice Age were giants. Mammoths with their curved tusks moving slowly across plains, woolly rhinoceroses armored and powerful, saber-toothed cats lurking with lethal patience, cave bears towering in their strength, and alongside them the more familiar forms: wolves, deer, reindeer, bison. To live in such a world was to walk in the shadow of greatness, to measure human strength against creatures both feared and revered. Many of these animals are gone now, but in their time, they were partners in the human story, shaping the strategies, the tools, the courage required for survival. And yet, even as humans hunted, they also respected. Evidence suggests that rituals surrounded the hunt, that bones were arranged, that skulls were placed with care, that symbols were drawn as part of a bond between hunter and prey. For every life taken, gratitude was shown, as if to acknowledge that survival was not only earned, but also given. This reverence for nature was not a luxury, it was a necessity. For without the animals, without the plants, without the rivers, humanity could not endure. The Ice Age also shaped communities. In small groups of families, people shared tasks, shared food, shared care. One gathered wood, another hunted, another prepared hides, another tended the fire. Children learned by watching, by doing, by listening to the stories told by elders. The wisdom of the old was treasured, for in a world of danger, memory was survival. To know where the herds would pass, to know which plants healed and which poisoned, to know how to track a wounded animal, these were not just skills, they were lifelines. Night after night around fires, humans told stories, perhaps of the hunt, perhaps of the stars, perhaps of spirits unseen. These stories bound the group together, gave meaning to struggle, passed lessons from one mind to another. In the warmth of firelight, imagination grew, and with imagination, culture was born. Even music found its place. Simple flutes carved from bone, drums made from stretched hides, rattles filled with stones. The sound of music broke the silence of the frozen world, lifting spirits, marking rituals, carrying emotion beyond words. In music, humans found rhythm, and in rhythm, they found hope. But the Ice Age was not endless. Slowly, the great glaciers began to retreat. The world warmed. Forests spread where once there was only ice. The giant animals dwindled, some vanishing forever. Humans adapted once more. They shifted from hunting mammoths to fishing rivers, from chasing herds to gathering plants. New tools emerged: bows and arrows, nets, hooks. Villages began to form where once there had only been camps. Life was still fragile, but the grip of the ice was loosening, and humanity was stepping into a new age. Yet the lessons of the Ice Age never faded. They lived on in memory, in story, in the quiet strength carried in human hearts. The endurance of those who faced the cold, the creativity of those who painted the caves, the courage of those who hunted giants, all of it flows into us. A heritage carried in our very blood. As you rest now, think of this unbroken line. From the first humans who struck sparks from stone, to those who crossed frozen plains, to those who carved flutes that sang in the night, you are part of the same story. Their survival is your survival. Their strength is your strength. Their dreams are your inheritance. Close your eyes and picture it. The fire glowing in the dark, the voices of your ancestors murmuring, the endless stars wheeling above, the world vast and cold yet filled with life. You are not apart from this story. You are within it, carried by it, shaped by it. And as the night deepens, as sleep gathers you, let the story continue within you. For the Ice Age may have ended, but its song has never stopped. The Ice Age was more than an age of cold. It was an age of transformation. Every step across the frozen earth was a step into becoming something more than fragile flesh. It was the shaping of resilience, the making of memory, the building of spirit. Imagine the endless white landscapes, the air so clear that every breath seemed sharper, almost metallic against the lungs. Across these plains, humans walked not only with hunger and struggle, but with vision. They began to understand patterns. They saw that the stars above moved with regularity, that the moon grew and faded, that the herds migrated in rhythm with the seasons. Knowledge was forming, slowly, gently, like snow gathering on the ground. Each discovery was precious. To know where water would pool after ice melted was to find life. To know where animals carved trails was to follow food. To know how to shape stone into tools was to hold survival in the palm of the hand. But beyond survival, there was meaning. For every skill mastered, every obstacle overcome, humans began to ask not only how to live, but why. And in that question, something new awakened. The Ice Age gave humanity ritual. The gathering at fire was no longer only warmth, it was communion. Fire was treated as a presence, something to be fed, something to be cared for, something that seemed alive. Around flames, humans shared not only food, but also imagination. They spoke of ancestors. They spoke of spirits. They spoke of forces greater than themselves, giving order to the chaos of ice and storm. In this way, survival created not only communities of bodies, but communities of minds, and the earth itself was teacher. The ice carved valleys, spread rivers, shaped mountains. It moved slowly, yet its force was greater than any creature. To live in its shadow was to understand humility, and perhaps in that humility came reverence. Humans were small, yes, but smallness did not mean weakness. Smallness meant adaptation. Smallness meant cleverness. Smallness meant endurance. In time, the very pressures of the Ice Age carved not only land, but the human spirit. Language grew richer. Tools grew sharper. Networks of families grew wider. There were moments of loss, great extinctions, harsh winters, famines that emptied whole valleys, but always there was return. Always there was another dawn. Always there was a persistence that nothing could erase. And when the glaciers pulled back, when the ice retreated into the mountains, humanity was not the same as before. The long season of hardship had forged something unbreakable. Humans emerged with new skills, new dreams, new bonds that carried them forward into forests, into fields, into rivers. The Ice Age ended, but the strength it gave did not. It was carried into the ages that followed, into the shaping of villages, into the planting of seeds, into the raising of civilizations. Even now, deep within us, the memory of the Ice Age lingers. It is in the way we gather close to warmth. It is in the way we prepare food together. It is in the way we tell stories at night. It is in the awe we feel when looking at stars scattered across a frozen sky. The world has changed, but the echoes remain, like a song passed down from generation to generation. So as you drift now, imagine yourself there, among them. Walking across the snow, hearing the crunch beneath your feet. Seeing the breath of mammoths rise like clouds in the distance, feeling the warmth of a fire after a long day, listening to voices hum low songs in the dark. You are part of this. You have always been part of this, for the Ice Age was not only survival, it was the shaping of humanity itself. The Ice Age was not lived in grand sweeps of history alone. It was lived one breath at a time, one step at a time, one decision at a time. A single spark struck from stone. A single shelter carved from snow, a single meal shared in silence. These were the threads that, woven together, made endurance possible. Picture a small band of humans moving across the tundra. Their clothes are thick with fur, stitched carefully with bone needles and sinew. Every thread has meaning, every stitch has purpose. A child carries a pouch of dried berries. An elder walks slowly, leaning on a staff carved with markings of past journeys. Hunters walk ahead, their eyes scanning the horizon for movement, reindeer, bison, mammoth. Behind them, fire is carried in a hollowed stone, embers glowing, wrapped in moss to keep alive through the cold. Fire was too precious to lose. To let it die meant hours of striking and waiting, hours without warmth. And so it was guarded as if it were itself a living creature, a member of the group. At night, shelters were built quickly. Sometimes from branches and hides, sometimes carved directly into snowbanks where the wind could not reach. Inside, the air warmed quickly, breath turning the space into a pocket of life against the vast cold outside. The fire was lit, shadows moved on the walls. Stories began. Some stories told of hunts, of dangers, of triumphs. Others spoke of spirits that walked the ice, of ancestors who still guided them. of stars that carried meaning, and in the silence between words, there was always the sound of the wind, reminding them that the earth was vast, that they were small, and that they needed one another. Days were measured not by clocks but by light and hunger. When the sun rose weakly above the horizon, the hunters set out, leaving trails of footprints in the snow that the wind would soon erase. Their tools were simple yet precise: spears tipped with stone, bows strung with sinew, traps built from branches. A single hunt could decide the fate of the group. If the arrow struck true, there would be food, hides, and bone for tools. If it missed, there would be hunger and perhaps death. The weight of survival pressed heavily, but it also sharpened focus, drew them together in unity. As the earth warmed, the glaciers retreated further, releasing water that carved valleys and fed great rivers. Where there had once been endless sheets of ice, there were now fertile plains. The landscapes of Europe, Asia, and the Americas began to change before human eyes, turning from frozen silence into green, breathing worlds. For the first time in their history, humans faced a choice: to continue the old ways of constant wandering, or to begin planting roots in this newly softened earth. At first, survival still demanded movement. Hunting parties still followed herds, and families still gathered along rivers that swelled each season. But slowly, in small pockets of the world, seeds were placed in soil not by accident, but with intention. The first experiments were humble: grains left near camp sprouting into stalks, beans and roots returning after seasons. Humans began to notice the patterns. They began to understand that they could shape their environment, not just follow it. Agriculture was not born in a single place, nor in a single moment. It appeared in whispers across the world, in the Fertile Crescent, in the valleys of China, in the highlands of the Andes. Each time, it marked a turning point. The Ice Age wanderers were becoming settlers. But this change did not come without struggle. To plant meant to stay. To stay meant to defend. Communities that had once been small and mobile became larger, bound to the land they worked. Homes grew sturdier, villages emerged, and with them, the beginnings of society as we know it. Rules, traditions, shared labor, and shared dreams. The animals of the Ice Age had long been companions and prey. Now some became partners. Wolves that had once lingered at the edges of firelight grew closer, forming bonds with humans and slowly becoming dogs. Wild cattle and goats were brought under watch. The relationship between human and animal shifted from the endless chase of predator and prey to a careful balance of care, domestication, and survival together. The memories of the Ice Age did not vanish. In the carvings, in the songs, in the myths passed down by word of mouth, the stories of the cold world lived on. The great mammoths, the roaring lions, the endless winters, they became legends. And these legends shaped the first faiths, the first rituals. Humanity carried forward not only survival, but meaning. As villages grew, so too did imagination. People built more than shelters. They built sacred spaces, stone circles, and monuments that aligned with the stars. They buried their dead with care, honoring life as something beyond the present moment. Time itself, once measured only by the rising and setting of the sun, began to be marked in cycles of planting, harvest, and ritual. The Ice Age had tested humanity's endurance. But the age that followed would test something greater: the human capacity to create. It is here that the first sparks of civilization were struck. From the embers of fire-lit caves, humanity stepped into fields of grain, rivers of trade, and cities of stone. Yet the foundation was the same: the lessons learned in cold winds and frozen nights, the memory of survival carved into human spirit. The Ice Age ended, but it was never truly gone. Its mark lived in our bones, in our myths, in the shape of the world itself. The resilience that carried humanity through the cold would carry us further still into empires, into exploration, into the endless unfolding of history. And perhaps, as we drift into rest, we can remember this: that every comfort we know, every dream we hold, was made possible by those who came before, who endured hunger, who faced ice, who lit fires against the dark and refused to let them go out. The Ice Age was not only the story of survival, it was the story of becoming. When the Ice Age loosened its grip and the world began to warm, humanity entered a new chapter. The frozen barriers that once separated groups melted away, and rivers opened paths across continents. The earth itself seemed to breathe differently. Soils thawed, forests spread, and animals long confined to migration routes now roamed new lands. For humans, this change was both opportunity and challenge. The hunters and gatherers who had learned to endure scarcity now faced abundance. But abundance brought its own tests. In the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, along the winding rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates, people began to linger longer than their ancestors. At first, the pattern seemed temporary. Camps became seasonal, built when the rivers flooded and fields grew lush. But year after year, families returned to the same places, and in time, the camps grew permanent. Here, grains like barley and wheat, once collected wild, began to be sown with intention. In this moment, agriculture was not just survival, it was choice. Humanity had discovered that they could not only adapt to the earth, they could shape it. The change was slow, stretching across generations. A child born to hunters might live to see fields cultivated. That same child might raise children who never hunted a mammoth, never wandered a forest, but instead worked the land, built granaries, and watched as villages became towns. Humanity's relationship with time shifted as well. In the Ice Age, survival was measured in days and seasons. But in this new world, people began to think in years, in cycles of planting and harvest, in generations that looked forward as well as back. With permanence came new responsibilities. A field left untended could starve a family. A storehouse poorly guarded could doom a village. Where once the danger had been the sudden attack of predators or the sharp bite of winter, now it came from disputes over land, over water, over stored grain. Survival demanded new skills: diplomacy, organization, cooperation, and sometimes conflict. Humanity was learning not only how to live with the earth, but how to live with each other in greater numbers. And so the first societies began to form. Clay was shaped into bricks and homes rose, clustered close for safety. Pottery was fired to carry water and store food. Looms wove fibers into cloth. What had begun in the Ice Age as survival through adaptation now evolved into survival through innovation. Every invention carried the memory of hardship: fire from frozen nights, weaving from animal hides, building from shelters and caves, but each was refined, reshaped, and made into something enduring. As agriculture spread, so too did settlement. In the Nile Valley, floods left behind rich soil where seeds thrived. In the Indus Valley, cities would rise with streets and drains, showing foresight and planning. In China, millet and rice took root, feeding generations. In the Americas, maize was cultivated, and with it, cultures flourished. Each region told its own story, but the rhythm was the same. Humanity was no longer only chasing survival. Humanity was beginning to build, and as they built, they dreamed. The lessons of the Ice Age: fire as sacred, animals as symbols, the cycles of the moon and sun as guides, became woven into new forms of storytelling. Myths grew alongside cities, carrying the echoes of a time when survival felt uncertain. The gods of fertility, storms, and harvest reflected the anxieties of farmers who prayed their crops would grow. Stone monuments rose to honor the skies, connecting the work of hands to the mysteries of the cosmos. For though the Ice Age had ended, its spirit lived on. The memory of cold and scarcity taught humans never to take abundance for granted. And so rituals emerged: offerings, dances, prayers whispered at dawn. The earth was no longer just a place of survival, it was a partner, a force to be respected, even feared. In this respect, the people of warming Earth remained children of the Ice Age, forever shaped by its trials. Villages became towns, and towns became cities. With cities came trade. Paths once carved by migrating herds became roads trodden by merchants. The obsidian from volcanic lands, the salt from dried seas, the spices from distant valleys, these moved from hand to hand, carrying not only goods but stories. Humanity was weaving itself into a single fabric, connected across distances that once seemed impossible. And with trade came writing. At first, marks in clay to count grain, to measure cattle, to record debts. But soon those marks became symbols, and symbols became stories. The voices of ancestors could now be preserved, not only in memory but in words. Humanity, once scattered across the Ice Age world, had found a way to speak across time itself. Still, danger never disappeared. Floods came. Droughts returned. Diseases spread through close quarters. Wars erupted as rulers sought power. Yet through it all, the resilience born in frozen caves and on icy plains endured. The same determination that carried humanity through glacial nights now carried it through the storms of civilization. And slowly, civilization reached upward. Ziggurats, pyramids, temples, and towers rose like mountains built by human hands, reflections of the awe that had once been reserved for cliffs of ice and caverns of stone. Fire that once flickered in caves now burned in hearths across cities. The stars that once guided hunters now guided sailors across oceans. The resilience that had been forged in scarcity now fueled ambition in abundance. The Ice Age was over, but it was also eternal, etched into memory, into myth, into the very design of human persistence. It had taught humanity the hardest lesson, that survival is never given, but earned. And that lesson echoed in every farmed field, every built home, every spoken prayer. As cities grew and cultures spread, humanity stood on a threshold that seemed almost impossible to imagine during the cold grip of the Ice Age. What had once been small bands of hunters, clinging to survival beneath frozen skies, had now become communities numbering in the thousands, bound not only by blood but by shared purpose, shared belief, and shared destiny. The earth itself seemed to guide this transformation, its rivers carving out fertile plains, its mountains offering stone for building, its skies marking the passage of time with the movements of sun and moon. The Nile, steady and patient, became the lifeline of Egypt. Each year its waters rose, spreading fertile soil like a gift, and each year humanity learned to shape its rhythm, building canals and reservoirs, turning the river into a partner in survival. Temples rose from the desert, their walls etched with stories that carried the memory of both abundance and scarcity. The pyramids, massive and enduring, were not only tombs but symbols of human ambition, reminders that what once began as the struggle to endure the cold had now become the desire to endure through time itself. Farther east, in the valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamia blossomed with invention. Here the wheel was carved, the plow pulled by animals across fields, and writing etched into clay. Kings and priests sought order, building laws to govern their people, and ziggurats that rose like steps into the heavens. The people of Mesopotamia still looked to the skies, not only for signs of rain, but for meaning, for purpose, for a connection to the vastness that once humbled their Ice Age ancestors under endless stars. In the Indus Valley, carefully planned cities appeared, with streets laid in grids, drains carrying water away, and homes that spoke of a people who understood order, balance, and harmony. Trade flourished here too, beads, pottery, and precious stones passing from hand to hand. Civilization was becoming a network, a web that stretched across rivers, deserts, and seas, just as Ice Age hunters once stretched across continents in search of food and fire. In China, rice paddies shimmered like mirrors, terraces carved into mountainsides, showing humanity's ability to shape the very land itself. Dynasties rose, philosophies were born, and wisdom passed from teacher to student, reflecting on the balance of nature, the cycles of time, and the place of humanity within it all. Across the oceans, in the Americas, maize became the heartbeat of life. Communities grew in valleys and forests, building temples that echoed the rhythm of the stars, the sun, and the moon. Even here, distant and unconnected to the old world, the story was the same. Humanity was learning to root itself in place, to take the lessons of movement and migration and transform them into permanence. And yet, beneath all this growth, the echo of the Ice Age remained. The fragility of survival was never forgotten. Floods could still destroy, drought could still starve, disease could still spread. The memory of scarcity made every harvest sacred, every ritual necessary, every story worth telling. The myths and legends that grew in these early civilizations often carried the shadow of those ancient fears. Stories of great floods echoed across cultures, perhaps recalling the melting of glaciers and the rising of seas. Tales of fire from the sky, of darkness swallowing light, of beasts and trials, all carried the DNA of memories passed down from those who once huddled in caves and watched the Ice Age storms rage outside. Survival was no longer only physical, it was cultural, spiritual, intellectual. Humanity was learning to endure not only with tools and food, but with stories, with meaning. Empires rose, but so too did fragility. Power, like ice, could shift and crack. Kingdoms flourished, only to fall. Rulers built monuments, only to be forgotten. The Ice Age had taught humans that nothing lasts unchanged, that survival means adaptation, and adaptation means humility. The same lesson carried forward into this new world, hidden beneath the grandeur of temples and palaces, reminding humanity that to endure, they must continue to adapt, and in every corner of the world humans did. They sailed seas on wooden ships, chasing horizons that once felt unreachable. They climbed mountains and crossed deserts, turning what once were barriers into pathways. They charted the skies, learning the cycles of planets and stars. They listened to the earth, its winds, its waters, its seasons, and built lives around its rhythms. The story of humanity was no longer just survival. It was curiosity, ambition, creativity. The cold trials of the Ice Age had forged not only strong bodies but restless minds. Minds that asked questions, sought patterns, and wondered why the world was as it was. Minds that built fires not only for warmth but for light in the darkness of thought. Minds that shaped tools not only to hunt but to carve symbols, to paint stories, to leave messages for the future. And so, as the first great civilizations grew and spread, the lesson of the Ice Age remained hidden at their core. Humanity endures not by resisting change, but by moving with it, shaping it, and transforming it into opportunity. The glaciers may have retreated, but the endurance they demanded never left. The Ice Age had ended, but the story of survival, the story of adaptation, resilience, and imagination was only beginning. From the first sparks of civilization, humanity began weaving itself into a greater story, one not only of survival but of transformation. The same hands that once shaped flint into blades now carved stone into statues and raised towers to the sky. The same eyes that once scanned the frozen horizon for mammoths and shelter now studied the heavens, tracing constellations, charting time, and seeking meaning in the stars. And yet, beneath every temple, every road, every city wall, the pulse of ancient endurance still beat, the memory of the Ice Age still whispering that nothing comes without hardship. Nothing endures without adaptation. As empires rose, they carried the lessons of survival into grandeur. Rome became a city of stone and order, its legions marching with discipline, its aqueducts carrying water as rivers once carried life across the plains. The Greeks built temples of harmony, balancing stone upon stone with precision, their philosophers asking questions that echoed the restless curiosity once born from nights of Ice Age hunger and wonder. Across Asia, dynasties flourished. Scholars compiled histories. Poets gave voice to the beauty and fragility of life. In Africa, kingdoms thrived, their gold and wisdom spreading along trade routes as far as the deserts and seas allowed. Everywhere humanity stretched, everywhere it endured, carrying the spark of survival into every new horizon. But survival was never free of challenge. Wars rose like storms, sweeping across fields and cities. Plagues spread, unseen but devastating, reminding humans of their smallness against the vast web of life. Famines returned when crops failed, echoing the starvation of ancestors who once searched for game in the frozen silence. Yet again and again humanity rose. The same will that once carved spears and stitched furs now invented medicines, forged iron, built ships that crossed oceans. What was once instinct became knowledge. What was once necessity became wisdom. The seas became new frontiers. The Phoenicians sailed, leaving behind cities of trade. The Polynesians crossed the vast Pacific in canoes, guided not by maps, but by stars, winds, and the memory of patterns written across generations. Vikings braved the northern waters, carving through ice and storm. And in time, great voyages stretched across the globe, weaving continents into connection. The resilience born in the Ice Age had transformed into exploration, into discovery, into the boldness to leave familiar shores and trust the unknown. The Middle Ages came, cloaked in both darkness and light. Castles rose as fortresses of survival. Monasteries preserved knowledge like hidden fires through long winters of conflict and uncertainty. Farmers tilled the soil, their lives humble but steady, their resilience mirroring that of ancestors who once planted seeds in the shadow of retreating glaciers. And as time turned, the Renaissance blossomed a rebirth of curiosity, art, and science. Humanity looked again at the world with wonder, not just to endure, but to create. Painters captured the glow of light on canvas. Engineers designed machines to lift, to fly, to transform. The lessons of survival became the foundations of imagination, and still, the story pressed on. The age of exploration brought ships that circled the world, compasses that pointed the way, maps that grew more detailed with every journey. Humanity was no longer confined to the rivers and valleys that first gave them grain. The oceans themselves became pathways, linking distant lands, exchanging goods, ideas, and cultures. The resilience of the Ice Age hunters echoed now in the courage of sailors who faced storms, in settlers who braved new continents, in explorers who pushed beyond known borders. Then came the age of machines. The Industrial Revolution reshaped the world as deeply as the retreat of the glaciers once had. Coal and steam replaced wind and muscle. Factories rose where fields once stretched. Cities grew vast and crowded, their skies filled with smoke, their streets alive with movement. Humanity had once endured the Ice Age by harnessing fire in caves. Now it endured by harnessing fire in engines, fire that powered locomotives, ships, and the first steps into an interconnected world. Yet even in the roar of industry, the old lessons whispered, adapt or fall behind, endure or be swept away.